So we organize things around kind of three themes that have a few questions. So first thing that I would like to discuss is how to navigate organizational resistance to AI adoption, right? And I guess my first question is, what are the most common reasons that you see employees and leadership giving to resist AI initiatives? And already jumping into the follow-up, how can change leaders proactively address those concerns that are raised by both leadership and employees? And let me start with Oliver.
I'm sure we're jumping in, wanting to go first, so thank you for that. Look, I think resistance usually shows up in three forms. So I would say fear, distrust, and then friction. So if we start with fear, employees worry, is AI replacing me? Leaders worry about, is this creating risk I can't explain to LPs? And to overcome that, I think you really want explicit messaging, right? So you want to say AI won't replace judgment; it will replace process. What I find is that the best investors are still the best investors, but with better tooling, higher throughput, sharper pattern recognition. So you frame AI as augmentation, and then you prove it by redesigning work. So you show what AI takes off the plate. So it takes off admin, it takes off first drafts, it takes off extraction, and what that frees up. So you get higher quality analysis and more time with management teams and more time on value creation. On the second point, so distrust, I think people have seen hallucinations all over the news. They've also seen overconfident outputs, and nobody in private capital wants to be embarrassed in front of an investment committee. So I think the answer to that is, or it isn't, I think, trust the model. It's going back again to change management. It's trust the process. So you put quality controls around it. You have citations where they're possible. You have structured prompts. You have second source verification, a sliding scale of review. You don't have to review everything word for word, but high impact use means higher scrutiny. And so what you do there is you normalize that. I think AI outputs are like a talented but unreliable junior analyst. So they're fast, they're super useful, but they still need supervision. And then just on the third point, friction. Look, if AI lives in a separate app with separate logins and it's unclear what data can go in and what people can do with it, frankly, they won't bother, right? They'll revert to their old habits in a week. So you have to, I think, reduce friction relentlessly. You need approved tools, you need single sign-on, you need templates, where possible, you want to have integrations into where people actually work. So you use Outlook or Word or Excel or CRMs or your data rooms. You need to allow them to play with the tools in the space that they're used to operate. And as a final point, I have to say this because I'm a lawyer. This is important in a regulated investor-facing environment, right? Legal and compliance resistance these days, it is usually about uncertainty, right? It's not about wanting to obstruct.
Right.
So the lesson there, I think, is don't bring legal and compliance in for binary sign-offs at the end. Bring them in early, co-design the use case, document the risks and the mitigations in a pragmatic, handy way. Show them that you understand the risks and that you're managing them. And what you find is that they stop being a gate or barrier, and they ultimately start being the accelerant because they want to get the best out of the business, just like you.
Absolutely. Robert, we'd love to hear your take on.
What a great overview. So I don't have that much to add, other than I think the question is good in that it segments out kind of leadership and employees. And from what I've seen, I totally echo what Oliver said about kind of this fear, distrust, friction paradigm. And often, especially early when we talked about, AI and how AI drives efficiency, there was kind of this, you would try to make this graph in your head where you said, this is how frequent a task is, this is how much value it has. We kind of want to be on this kind of high frequency, as high value as possible type, line, right? Like find the things that we can automate that bring us lots of value that we do all the time. If we don't do it often, it's probably not worth automating. If it doesn't bring a lot of value, it's probably okay. That's the kind of thing. I feel like we underappreciate that there are some tasks that are, and this is silly, but more pleasant to do than others. And from an employee's perspective, if you can automate away the parts about their jobs that they don't like, and there are undoubtedly lots of those, that massively increases buy-in, right? And it also maybe gets them to use the tools in ways that they wouldn't have otherwise been excited to use about, right? Kind of reducing this friction in a way by offering a carrot. And so I think, working with employees early on to try to understand, and it's funny because oftentimes, especially very senior leadership, doesn't have a great sense of what employees actually do day to day. And oftentimes what we see is that very senior leadership is designing AI initiatives that are going to support and augment the lowest level of employees. And there are disconnects there. So trying to figure out, like, what are these people actually doing? What do they enjoy about their jobs and what don't they? And how can we design a tool that would get them excited? On the leadership side, what I talk most often about, especially kind of in the last year, is this question about return on investment. And are we really going to see, it costs so much and it's quite disruptive. Are we really going to see an ROI effect? And I think one thing that isn't talked about as much, and it's not the kind of most shiny thing, but we have designed for thousands of years, we've designed our human organizations to reflect the strengths and weaknesses of human employees. And now, in a way, especially as these tools grow more and more sophisticated, we have kind of almost a new class of employee. And it is hard to realize the full value and efficiency gains of an AI agent or an AI system without also reconsidering, like, how does the organization function, right? For example, certain research tasks used to take like a week. And now we can at least get a first draft in minutes. That changes how we structure collaboration, right? That changes who talks to whom, how they talk about it, how they plan their day. And if you essentially have a setup where someone says, well, getting a research report on topic X takes a week, so I'll action the report and I'll check in again on a week. And now it takes 2 minutes, but they still check in a week later. They're not going to realize any efficiency gains. Like, of course, you're not going to get any ROI from that. So thinking about that from a leadership perspective is important. And finally, I think kind of what you measure tends to be what you get. And so thinking about, especially in the early stages, how do we measure the impact that this new project has on our organization? And how do we measure the things that we care about is likely going to be really important to, one, being able to justify any sort of investment, but two, kind of really prioritizing and by thinking about what you're going to measure, you're thinking about like what are the metrics, what are the proxies, and really starting to prioritize that early, I think leads to the most successful kind of implementation. So yeah, great question.
No, thank you. This is, well, I have I guess I have to trim down my notes here. I have a million notes on everything both of you said. I would say, Robert, that, to your point, just to share a quick anecdote from my own team, which is, it's exactly what you said about research, right? Some of the things that we have to do involve pretty deep and broad research, and are things that, like, when I was doing this 2 years ago, I would have to tell people, like, hey, this may take me like a week or two for a first draft, like maybe even a month, depending on kind of, on how, on the breadth of the ask. And we already in our team restructure these workflows to do that in a couple of days, because with the new AI tools that we leverage internally, we can get to a first draft dramatically quicker, which it is the heavy lifting. You still have to review, make sure that things make sense, and do the intellectual work after that. But you're absolutely right? It only adds value if I rework the workflow in a way that I can get there to everyone else much faster. Otherwise, I'm just kind of, juggling my own internal capacity in a certain way. So that's one my kind of my 2 cents here on seeing that in practice in my own team. And yeah, absolutely learning what people like, right, is it just reduces friction to pick all of those framework. Reducing friction is really, really important. I don't know if you would agree with the statement, but one way that I tend to think about reducing friction that has to do with what you meant about like meeting people where they are, right? Meet them if they are at work, meet them at work. If they are, in other places, meet them there.
Absolutely.
So yeah, and that's a great, and I really, really like that framework because it's a great segue to my next question, which is about trust building specifically, right? And you already mentioned citations and kind of broadly speaking, and paraphrasing the notion of like, trust but verified, right? And I guess I wanted to double click and dive a bit deeper into that, specifically when we think about the industry that we're talking about, right? Private markets, private equity. This is an industry where, organizational success depends heavily on human expertise and judgment that gets a gigantic amount of input in terms of just like data and all of that, right? So, I'd like to kind of dive a little bit deeper into the discussion of the ways you can build that trust, especially from the user perspective and for the perspective of the clients of users.
Although, frankly, your first answer was better than mine. So, look, you're absolutely right. So I agree. So in private equity, and private capital more generally, actually, trust isn't abstract, right? It's trust in judgment, it's trust in confidentiality, it's trust in process that ultimately then gets you to a decision. So I usually start with, I think I would describe it as kind of a simple reframe. So I don't ask people to trust the AI. Ask them, as I said, almost or alluded to in the first person. You ask them to trust the governance and the workflow around it, right? So I think that often boils down to 3 things. So first, you have to make the boundaries clear, right? So which tools have actually gone through legal and compliance and InfoSec and are approved, what use cases are off limits, and what practical guardrails have to be observed day to day. And what you find is that clarity then unlocks adoption, because the opposite, so ambiguity, that creates paralysis, or I think worse, shadow use of AI, right? Second, you do have to build human in the loop into the operating model where it matters. So it's not for everything, because if it were, you kill the ROI. But for anything influencing investment decisions or producing external comms or creating material risk, you do, or you should have, meaningful human oversight. So that it's not a slogan. It's kind of it is supposed to be a workflow. So you need review thresholds, you need sign off, you need escalation routes, and that's what protects the firm and makes professionals comfortable, frankly, putting their names to the outputs. And then third, I kind of normally say, show, don't tell. My son is only 5, and his favorite part of the day every day is his show and tell. And I think it's great because in this context, because examples that you should use to encourage adoption need to be those that actually resonate in private equity or private capital. So you say stuff like, we cut first pass diligence time by 30% without lowering quality, or we say we improved the first draft of IC materials and we spent more time thinking about it than we did formatting it, things like that. And what you end up doing then is you shift the culture from what some might think at the moment is like AI use is cheating, to AI use is like table stakes. And when senior partners and senior staff in private equity and private capital talk openly about how they use AI in that way, including maybe mistakes, it gives everybody permission to learn.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's so important, right? To just model the behavior in many ways and lead by example. So, anyways.
So I have an almost technocratic answer to the question on trust, and I feel like I don't know if I would kind of describe myself as a big kind of Web3 person, but I feel like one of the takeaways from Web3 was that technology can go a huge way, I think more than people would have realized in creating trust, right? So the fact that anyone was willing to buy Bitcoin, which like on its face seems to lack any sort of mechanism to enforce trust, the only mechanism being kind of cryptography, and cryptography in such a way that 99.9% of people probably had no real understanding, but there were enough people that could verify like this works and your money won't just disappear overnight, that other people were willing to trust it. And I think that, to me, and you know, granted, an engineer who like, you know, nerds out about this stuff, but to me the most effective way to build trust is if you can show me that a system can't fail in certain ways, right? This kind of regulation compliance by design idea. And so thinking about, and this is, you know, where the human piece comes in, is we rarely have this communication, right? But going from what do you distrust or what do you worry about the system, talking to the engineers and saying, well, can you put some sort of safeguard in place that guarantees that, you know, we can't fail in the relevant sort of way. So the more sophisticated versions of this is I have colleagues at MIT who are working on essentially putting large language models in a cryptographically secure box so that you can guarantee that nobody, not even the provider of the box, the provider of the LLM, can see what goes in and out, what happens inside of this. Except for the user, it's really like a fully private conversation. That's like the one extreme of it. The other extreme is I was recently working with a law firm that was interested in essentially having contract templates. And they were very frustrated that every so often an LLM would modify parts of the template rather than just kind of pre-filling the pieces that they were interested in. And the reason was that they would, you know, just hand this off to an LLM and say, here's a template, here's some additional context, update the template. And of course, the LLM will kind of tweak the template. And it was very easy for us to, you know, change that so that, you know, we're just pre-filling areas of a template document. And it's just a physical impossibility that we change any of the other language and suddenly everybody slept better at night. And it's like the simplest little change, but we kind of use technology to build trust. And it's nice because otherwise, you know, then, you know, we talked about motivation earlier, like employees don't want to have to double check whether some part of the template that wasn't meant to be modified was modified. If I can just guarantee to you this will never happen, it's much more pleasant to use the tool than to know, oh, now I have to read all 17 pages all over again. So that kind of thing, I think, goes a huge way to kind of building trust through verifiability, through technology design.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, we see that at Ontra every day when we're designing our products, right? The LLM is going to be the answer for a lot of this stuff, but not all of the stuff. And it's so powerful when you're able to layer kind of the rules-based things with an LLM and know what's appropriate in each part. So yeah, I guess keep me honest here if I am oversimplifying what the two of you just said, but it sounds like, you know, the way to go here is to design for trust, both on the granular technological level and on the broader system level of your broader ecosystem, and having all the guardrails in place, the humans in the loop in place where it matters, and the review layers and approval from legal and compliance, and having kind of, you know, this trust ecosystem driving trust across the board, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. You need it at the technical and operational and therefore the change level.
Absolutely. And look, I mean, I guess we could talk about this for much, you know, many hours, more hours than we probably have. So let me move on to the next theme, and I think we have a good segue here on that discussion. And I would like to talk a little bit specifically about getting buy-in and the messaging around it. So yeah, what strategies have you seen that help generate that sort of internal momentum and buy-in for AI, especially in firms like, you know, private markets, law in general, right? There is strong legacy culture. There is, you know, change aversion, that kind of stuff. When I talk with my tech colleagues, I have to remind them that this is, you know, one of the most stable professions and fields of work there are out there, right? So it's different from kind of Silicon Valley startup mindset per se, what kind of the lawyer mindset is, right? See, all of you, we're all smiling here because we all had these discussions, and it sounds like we all leave them a little. So would love to hear from you how to generate that, internal momentum, get that buy-in, and overcome, the old habits of folks that have been doing that for a long time, and a culture that has been working on specific ways for a long time.
We agreed. I think I go first on this one.
Yeah.
Is that So I think that it's really interesting, right? We have these, both the provision of legal services and private markets are extremely fragmented markets, right? It's not like there's one player that controls this space. And presumably all of these players, and I know much more from the law firm world, every law firm thinks that they are unique and they're doing something different and they are differentiated in an important way. And I think that there's this fundamental idea, which is right, or at least has been right for a long time, that technology flattens these differences, right? If you say we use the same technology as everybody else, right? No one got fired for buying IBM, but no one got promoted either, right? That's kind of this thing. And so, there's this worry that, especially if you are a more traditional firm, we're going to use the same technology as everybody else to keep up, but that's not going to differentiate us. And so how do we differentiate us? And maybe the worry is the things that used to differentiate us won't matter as much anymore in this kind of new future. And so we don't even want to, there's a risk aversion, right? There's a worry about entering this future. What I think is different now, and you only have to look at like vibe coding TikToks to see it, is the ability to have massive customization has never been greater, right? The ability to leverage technology not as a thing that flattens you, that keeps you kind of above the water, but that actually differentiates you and supercharges what already makes you special. That is really quite easy now. And we talk about playbooks and workflows and all these things. Those are kind of very personalized, very context-specific items that help you use technology in a way that is super customizable and super bespoke. And I foresee, this kind of legal tech area, I think is encountering this resistance earlier. But this is a bigger problem for SaaS as a whole, right? Where kind of one product, one size fits all, I think is becoming a much more challenging model when you have kind of these very low barriers to entry to do something custom. And I think the most successful players in this space are the ones that are saying, hey, we will help you customize our platform to suit your needs, and kind of forward deployed engineers and all that kind of stuff is really becoming quite popular. So yeah, I think that builds a lot of buy-in if you can kind of convince leaders that we're actually augmenting something they're already doing and something that already sets them apart.
Absolutely, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. I might sound like a bit of a broken record, but I I kind of revisit the strategy that I mentioned before. So in terms of kind of creating internal momentum, look, I think you run AI deployment and rollouts as a campaign, right? Rather than a procurement. And I find that, 4 things work particularly well. You'll notice that I say things in 3s, 4s, 5s, and 10s because I like memorable numbers. But the first one is defining a kind of commercially meaningful North Star, right? So not we're doing AI. Frankly, that's a capability statement. You need, we're doing AI to, compress deal cycle time, or, reduce hours spent on diligence. So it's kind of a sentence that the partnership can repeat, whether they're in private capital or they're in a law firm. And then second, you start with a use case that actually creates believers. So you don't find the perfect use case, you find a useful one that actually makes people say, oh, okay, that actually helped me. And that doesn't necessarily mean shooting for the stars with particularly complex ones, as I say, if simpler, lower hanging fruit will actually do, because they're normally quicker, cheaper, and often just as impactful. Third, you build that champion network. So, every team these days has early adopters that are playing with stuff at weekends or experimenting quietly in evenings. And So what you need to do is you need to find them, you need to formalize them, you need to give them visibility and let them show others what they're doing and what works. Because what you find is adoption spreads much faster peer-to-peer than it does top-down, right? And in some firms, that's where you do like short or really tightly scoped, sprints or hackathons. You don't do that as like some theatrical thing, but you actually do it to surface, real workflow level use cases and point people to the people that can show others how to do it. And then the fourth is what as I said before. So reduce friction, right? Put it to near zero. Put all your tools in existing applications. Have playbooks, have prompt templates, have guides, have office hours where champions can talk to people. Because people will try this stuff if it's easy and it's safe and it doesn't make them feel stupid, right? I think I was working on an AI project with a very big PE firm recently, and we were talking about labels for their project. And I think what I've learned over the last few years doing these change management projects is don't pitch this as innovation. Right? Innovation is optional. It's better to pitch it as, it's a bit of a corny word, pitch it as alpha. So you give people real performance edge. So they have that faster pattern recognition, the better screening, the better portfolio insights. Because cultures that were or are, on the whole, risk averse, move better when change actually matches or maps to actual returns, not some ideological idea like innovation in inverted commas.
Thank you. No, absolutely. I would add. Well, I do have you already answered a question that I had on my notes while you were talking, and so I was as you were. The second bullet of your analysis of finding the levers, finding that champion, and all of that. It sounds like we're all saying that there is finding that champion is so important. These champions, it's so important, and I guess the implication is in many ways it's probably better to kind of co-create and be collaborative about it, right? Rather than the proverbial top down. Right?
Yeah.
And
it can be tricky there. Yeah.
And when it comes to the alpha point, that's a very interesting point. Would love to hear both of your perspectives. Do you think, and I think that specifically for the private markets, right? The alpha narrative is already, back to your point about friction, right? That's already how people think about kind of pretty much everything in this world, right? Is about generating returns. Would you say that there is a difference in messaging depending on the stakeholder when it comes to the let's generate alpha narrative, or that is one that can, actually be a good one that works across the board from, very senior management people who are wanting to drive the change, but not necessarily are going to use the tools to the people boots on the ground doing the work? Or would you adopt kind of, a more layered strategy when it comes to messaging that across different stakeholders?
You want to go, Robert, or shall I?
It's the alpha thing is a great idea, but it came from you. So.
Yes. No, all good. So look, I think the alpha thing can run for all teams, but I think there's nuances in how you interpret it. I think it's wrong to say, and the reason why I say that nuance is I think it's wrong to try and sell AI within a PE firm or in a law firm, frankly, with a single generic message, because people in different teams care about different things, right? So you don't change the strategy, but you do change the framing. So, for example, if you look at senior leadership, right, the conversation is about outcomes, alpha, and risk. Right. So they want to know, does it improve returns, speed, scale, are we managing the downside properly? So you talk about AI in terms of like, I don't know, cycle time reduction, deployment of headcount, portfolio uplift, things like that. You don't talk about prompts and models and other things. You lead with like metrics and accountability and things like that won't blow up in a conversation with an IC or an LP, right? But for deal teams, it's still alpha, but it's like the message is a bit different. So what they care about is speed and judgment and not being embarrassed, right? From what I've seen. So you frame AI as an edge, but it's for better screening and faster diligence and stronger first drafts. And if you're explicit that AI, I think the important thing there is that you're explicit that AI isn't replacing the deal team's conviction in getting stuff done. It's just improving their work. And then if you then go to the other or another category of persons, and again, it's a different interpretation of alpha. If you talk about like ops teams or portfolio professionals, right, the alpha interpretation becomes even more practical. So in that sense, it's about friction and time and usability, and does the technology remove repetitive work, and does it reduce errors, and does it fit into the tools they already use? And so in that context, the proof points are super concrete. They're like fewer manual steps, faster reporting cycles, better operational visibility, things like that. But as I say, the common thread is the same, right? It's the same AI. It's alpha, but it's a slightly different message. I think if you don't get that messaging right, and as I say, go back to what I said before, if you start leaning on, "No, we're just going to innovate," I think you'll just get people nodding politely, but then they won't actually be executing, and you won't have much adoption.
Absolutely. Robert, anything you would add to that before we move to?
No, I mean, I think the alpha framing reminds me of the lawyer, consultant, doctor, or whatever that takes your job is not going to be AI. It's going to be a doctor, lawyer, consultant with AI. And it feels like a similar kind of thing, right? Like, how do you set yourself apart? And I think that, depending on who you're talking to, that kind of framing, resonates maybe more with some people than others. So yeah, I fully agree. And it's all about kind of trying to give people and organizations a sense of the value that you're generating, right? We're not innovating for innovation's sake. We're innovating because we want to get somewhere. And the place we're trying to go is the same place. Like, nothing's really changed about that. It's about how we get there and how everybody else is trying to get there. So totally agree with Oliver.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Let's moving on to we have time to one more kind of question and discussion. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we go beyond the pilot phase, right? So we build awareness. The initial resistance is no longer there. We got buy-in enough to get to buy some software and pilot it within the organization. As we've all probably seen at this point, it doesn't end there, right? So once you get to pilot, how do you get to real adoption? I guess that's going to be the overarching theme. And my next slightly narrower question, I guess, is what does a change-ready team or organization really looks like when it comes to AI? And how can you move towards that direction once you're already at that pilot stage, and then the whole new set of issues that come with the pilot stage starts hitting you? So let's do, I guess, Oliver first on this one. Is it fair? Feel free to switch around. Whoever wants to take it.
So there's different ways of interpreting change-ready organizations, right? I think some people would read it in different ways. I will read it in a way that I think suits me. So I don't think I don't mean one that has everything perfectly figured out. I interpret a change-ready organization as an organization that's kind of moving in the right direction, but with enough structure to kind of scale without chaos or stalling in the pilots you mentioned. So the firms that are change ready, I see them as tending to share here's another number, five traits. So clear ownership is the obvious one. So, AI has an executive sponsor, you have a day-to-day owner, because, frankly, if you don't have that, it is nobody's priority, or it will be a priority for a few, but there will be no traction. Second, I do think you need to have kind of a use case pipeline. So you don't need a fully formed roadmap, but you do need, a lightweight backlog of use cases that are ideally prioritized by value and feasibility. It's less about having all the answers and more about having a way to decide what to try next, and maybe not what to do, or what not to do. Yeah. Third, I think you have to have, and Robert will know this better than anyone, I'm sure, but that you have to have some data and integration maturity, right? So you have to have accessible data, or some accessible data. You need to have tools that integrate into existing workflows. You want to have minimal kind of copy and paste. It doesn't actually have to be perfect. Most data sets I'm looking at when I'm working with PE firms and law firms are far from perfect, but there has to be a kind of plan to improve the plumbing over time. Fourth, governance. Obviously, from a lawyer, you need approved tools, you need use cases, you need escalation routes, you need risk reviews for trials and pilots, ideally lightweight, quick ones. You want to be able to move quickly and safely. You don't want stuff getting stuck with your lawyers. And I think the fifth bit is you kind of need, a learning culture, right? You need, safe experimentation. You need shared lessons. You need acceptance that, some pilots are going to be duds, right? Not every pilot's going to become a product that you use, but every single one should teach you something, right? Maybe I'll hand over to Robert, who might tell us how we get to those things, because they're all a bit, they're the gold standard. But I do see those 5 things as, if you can work towards them, you're going to be in a very good place for making the most of the technology.
Yeah, I much like Oliver, I'm going to do what everyone does and interpret change ready to mean what I want it to mean. And so I think there's a good way to kind of segment this out between change ready leadership and then a change ready organization as a whole. And on the leadership side, Oliver talked about champions earlier. I think empowered champions are really key. The most, there are a couple different organizations you have. You have the organizations where everybody's aligned, right? We've been watching this AI thing for a while. There's no way to be without it. We're excited. We want to lead in this. We're set up to do it. Amazing, right? And we've empowered the right people to show us the way. Perfect. Then you have the other extreme, which is we're skeptical. This seems super risky. We haven't done anything, and we really we worry about this. And those organizations, they just need someone to help explain, right? They need to be shown the way, but they're not necessarily the most kind of dysfunctional organizations are the ones where you have both. And that's really tricky, right? Where you either have like the champions who are being pushed down, or you have the champions who have been empowered, but they're kind of being pulled back, or, stuff like that. And that's really tricky. And I, when you have that kind of setup, especially, I mostly work with law firms, which are these little fiefdoms. And so, if you have one partner saying, as far as I'm concerned, we're not doing any of this AI stuff, and another partner is saying to her associates, I want you all to be on the cutting edge, like, you get 5 hours a week or a month to play around in the sandbox, like, you just feel crazy, right? So you have to kind of address that piece. And then you have the change ready organization as a whole, and especially for larger organizations, it's not really realistic to expect everybody to be bought in, everybody to have spent time reading and listening to, webinars and things like that. But the best thing you can do, and this is kind of taking a page out of the B2C context where we can't just tell people what to do, you have to kind of show it, is ideally what you've done with the pilot is you've demonstrated that people who were part of the pilot are happier, faster, better, richer, younger, whatever it takes, right? And get other people to say, oh, I wish I was part of the pilot, right? Like, when do I get to use it? And that's to Oliver's, friction point. you want that next step then to be really easy, right? So we measured it, it's great, and then it's easy, and here's how. And if people are excited to join, then it should be easy. I think the way you can fall flat, though, is you do the pilot, and we ought to talk about this. You do the pilot and it's a flop, and you've measured it and it didn't work. Don't try to then push that onto the organization, because you get to do that once or twice. By the third time, people, it's the the technologist who cried AI. I don't know, like by the third time, the employees don't want to go along anymore, and it becomes harder and harder. You're just making the change management harder. So kind of being honest with yourself, like, this is what we care about. We've run the pilot. It worked or it didn't work, and then we go on. That's the way to do it. And otherwise, go back to the drawing board. The beauty of all of this is it has become easier to iterate and to do something new and to kind of tweak things. So yeah, my 2 cents.
I love that. I love that. I almost thought it would be, it's probably a wrong word to use, and it's not a nice word that has good connotations, but you almost want to create some sense of jealousy among those who aren't on the pilot, because they are so excited to get their hands on this technology because they've heard how good it is. But then on the other hand, as Robert says, I work with large number of private capital firms, and there's one in particular that is augmenting every single part of its business, everything from diary management to portfolio monitoring to, I don't know, pitching and research and everything, right? And they have a very streamlined POC piloting process where it goes to InfoSec, it's legal, it goes through me, and that we've gone through, I think it's about 130 different AI/Gen AI tools over the last 18 months that they've looked at. There is a significant proportion of those that have just been chucked to the wayside. You have to be prepared to look at something for 2 to 3 months and then say, you know what, wasn't worth it. Or it wasn't worth it because, and then you look for the next tool that deals with that issue, or at least maybe it's not here yet, and you pause it and you start looking at some other workaround. I love Robert's point. You have to be prepared to fail with this at this stage, and accept it and move on. But one failure is not the reason to give up either. As in, there are so many tools out there that have such a huge ROI. You can, and I hate to use the corny phrase, you can fail fast, and then move on. And that really unlocks the value.
But yeah, I mean, absolutely, that resonates a lot for us at Ontra, because as you can imagine, right, we have clients who are testing all sorts of tools. Sometimes people come to us and they already have been testing elsewhere, and we have to make exactly this point, right, that we are at a stage of the technology that experimentation is to be expected, and that you're going to test out a ton of stuff. Some stuff is going to work for you, some stuff is not. And addressing this is just so important, right, to building this momentum and moving things forward and creating that. I like the euphemism positive peer pressure for the jealousy point, but it's kind of
that's better. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a force of nature, that kind of stuff, right? You see your colleagues doing something that is cool and productive and effective, and you want to do it as well. It's just, it's a bit of a human thing, I suppose. So, well, thank you so much. I think we only have a few minutes left. Really appreciate the discussion. Would like to, thank our audience, and in particular, the two of you. Hope that everyone enjoyed this as much as I did. Quite frankly, I could keep this going for a while if all of us had the time. It was really, really a pleasure. We know that your schedules are super busy, so I really would like to thank you for this thoughtful discussion and for taking the time.